Hi there, and welcome back to the Explaining History YouTube channel. Now, throughout this week, I've been talking about um, perspectives on Hitler, looking at avoiding going too much unnecessarily into his private life and focusing on that as explanations for historical phenomena. Looking at how people gained access to Hitler when he was in Führer between 1933 and 39, and also on Hitler's attitudes to leadership during the war and how Hitler's early successes paradoxically lead to downfall later on. Now I want to talk about the relationship of ordinary Germans to Hitler. And this is very complicated. Enormously oversimplified things tend to be said on this subject. Noticeably, if you look at the work of Daniel Goldhagen, when he, in Hitler's Willing Executioners, essentially condemns the entirety of the German people as complicit in the Holocaust, saying that it's in essence if Hitler the votes cast for the Nazis imply that there was widespread demand for the Holocaust. Now, the extent to which the majority of ordinary German people were enthusiasts for genocide is very difficult. It's a very difficult statement to make, and the evidence suggests something far more complicated, and a far more complicated relationship, not just with the events of the Holocaust, but with the Führer himself. Now, as far as the relationship between ordinary Germans and Hitler and what they thought of Hitler, there's a wide range of things to say. So I'm just going to narrow it down to a couple of key areas. I'm going to question why it is German people didn't manage to overthrow Hitler, get rid of him, and be without him by the end of the war, even though it was abundantly clear that the war from 1943 onwards was probably going to be lost, and from 1944 onwards, certainly going to be lost. And also, then, this next question of the relationship between German people, the Führer, and the Holocaust itself. So, the first point. By 1940, many of the initial misgivings that a large number of German people had about the war had been dispelled. In Roger Morehouse's book, Berlin at War, he presents some compelling evidence that suggests that Germans were, in general, rather alarmed by the outbreak of war and felt rather uncomfortable and unsure and full of trepidation. There was not the enthusiasm Hitler had hoped for, the wild adulation and excitement. By 1940, because Hitler has been successful in the campaign in France, his popularity is at an all-time high. By and large, not because people are enjoying the war and thinking it's wonderful, but it's an excitement born of relief that the disaster that the Kaiser visited on Germany is not going to be repeated. The later years of the war, following the invasion of the Soviet Union, see Hitler gradually retreat from public life. The numbers of broadcasts by the Führer go down dramatically, and when people listen to them, he sounds old and tired and unwell, and indeed he is, and lacking the energy and vitality that he previously transmitted. And when the writing was on the wall for the Third Reich, there was obviously an attempt to overthrow Hitler, to assassinate him in the July bomb plot, but after that, there was no attempt to either get rid of Hitler or to do really anything to mitigate the oncoming onslaught and to remove Germany from the war as soon as possible. Ian Kershaw presents a thesis in his book The End, which is quite compelling. He lists 12 key areas, of which I'm only going to, for the sake of brevity, I'm going to list a few of the ones I think are most important. But he says, in the last year of the war, it was clear there was no alternative to Hitler because all alternatives had been eliminated from 1933 onwards. The Allies made it clear that they would only accept unconditional surrender, and that there were many people within the regime and beyond the regime who were now complicit in the regime's crimes and felt that there was no alternative to fight on for the end and hope for the best. So there were various reasons why German people felt they were now locked into this kind of Faustian pact with the regime. Now, on the subject of the Holocaust, Professor Richard J. Evans has written that by 1943, by midway through the war, the Holocaust was an open secret, i.e., anyone who wanted to know could know, but nobody did want to know. He says that there was a widespread range of emotional responses to the Holocaust, from disgust and fear and outrage through to indifference, through to complicity. And diary entries seem to support this. There are even entries of Nazi Party members who see the Jews herded onto trains and say things like, well, not that I like them particularly, but is there not a better way we could go about this? A more humane way? Does it have to end like this? There are or recollections of people seeing towards the end of the war, because it was German Jews who lingered on in Germany longest. They were almost like the latest to be deported. People seeing Jews march through town squares towards the station, everyone being fully aware of where they're going, and a general sense of shame emerging. So the Goldhagen thesis is based on assumptions that are largely unsustainable. It's not to suggest for a moment that the entire population of Germany had suddenly come to their senses and were profoundly sympathetic towards the Jews. Certainly not. But as with any population, there will be variations, even in the most extreme circumstances, as to thoughts and feelings on any given subject. After the war, Hitler became the person who to pin the blame on to exclusively to kind of mitigate a national sense of guilt. Well, we didn't know, and we trusted Hitler, and he led us to this. But also after the war, the memory of the Holocaust has to compete with a German sense of loss. The German people had also suffered immensely, and conveniently, as all peoples, nations do after wars, presented themselves as victims. There was more talk of, well, people talk about these Jews all the time, they forget about what we went through, and maybe we should focus a bit more on that. But that's kind of human nature for you, really. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this, and I will be adding another post later on today, probably tomorrow. Catch you then. All the best. Bye bye.